welcome back, everyone. I think we've got just a few more people coming in through the doors now. We're moving on to our fireside chat session. Joining us on the stage, Georgie Steele, co-founder and CTO at Maven, and moderator Jennifer Riggins, tech journalist. They're going to be talking about the trust stack and how to build the products that match users' needs, and diving into some really practical takeaways and practical patterns for trustworthy AI. A warm welcome for Georgie and Jennifer.
Better put it on the coaster. I don't want to offend anyone. That's like 5% of people in the audience will care. Okay, so it's interesting today what we're talking about because we are talking to an AI startup founder. You may wave. But who in here is a CTO? Raise your hand, please. Yes, I do require audience participation. I'm a very mean American that lives in London. Okay, who is a founder of a startup? So the thing is, for all you CTOs, you are founders of AI startups now. Who has AI in their product? Exactly. So I think when we're thinking about AI, we all should be thinking about it like a startup founder because it's so new and it's so, is aggressive the right word? Fast? Yeah. Fast, aggressive, I'm not sure.
Aggressively fast?
Aggressively fast, yes. Sometimes fast, quickly aggressive. But that we all need to start thinking that way and think like an AI founder because we're talking about trust. But with everything that we're speaking about, there's just considerations. And whether you are building AI for within your company and you're trying to find the right users within your company, or if you're trying to find the users or to retain your current users by thrusting AI into your product, that maybe they didn't approve anyway if you work in a regulatory industry. We all have to start adopting that startup mindset around AI and re-asking the questions and getting back into the habit that CTOs famously aren't the best at, which is asking who's this for, what's the business use case, how do I sell this to business? So I would love, Georgie, if you can introduce yourself and then also talk about like how you came up with this idea that what led you down a pathway you're like, okay, I guess I'm gonna start a business because it's not like the easiest thing to do is start a business. So what made you make that choice? And tell a bit about your background, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Georgie. I'm co-founder and CTO at Maven, where we help companies navigate climate policy. So telling them what policies are relevant, what are the impacts of those policies on their business, and what are some actions that they can take. We built our MVP in 2 months. We raised our pre-seed of 1.5 million in 2 weeks, and now we have customers globally. And the reason I tell you those facts is not to show off. I really don't care. It's more just the reason why we were able to do those such short time frames was because we focused on trust with customers and trust with investors. And to go back to your question on why we built this, we've always been very focused on the problem first. Yes, I want to use cool technology. I'm a CTO, of course I want to do that, but really I need to understand what's the problem that my users are facing and how do I address that and then bring in the technologies. So myself and my co-founder, we worked for climate tech prior to this. And what we saw was there was this slowdown in a point in the sales cycle and when we dug into that problem, we found that users were coming to the company we were at and they knew they needed a product like that, but they weren't really sure why. So then we had over 200 conversations with different people in the space before we built anything to really understand what the issue was. And what we found was there's such a fast rate of change in climate and sustainability policies that people just can't keep track. They don't know what policies are relevant to them. They don't know how it's going to change. They don't know the impacts of those policies on their business, and therefore they just can't take action. So we knew we could build something within that space. And then why we chose AI is because the data is very fragmented, and it's very fast moving, and it's impossible for a human to keep track of that. So it's a really good use case where AI can bring the clarity to the data and help users take action.
Because I know we don't want to hear this in remote CTOs, but AI as a solution for everything is not useful. And this is applying AI to a very specific, narrow problem. General AI is not very good at things, but training AI on very specific data focused on a very good problem is very important. But now I want to ask the audience, who thinks they know their ideal customer's problem statement? Oh my. That's good we're here then. That's a bit. So let's talk about how you figured out that you were able to fit the right problem with the right customer, and which came first, chicken or the egg? What is your problem statement steps, I guess?
Yeah, so in those first 200 chats and conversations we had, we figured out what the problem was, and that's they can't keep track of policies. And so there's something within there that doesn't really give us an idea of what we need to do necessarily. But we found that customers that struggle with this the most are ones that operate in multiple jurisdictions. As you can imagine, policy in one country or state is quite complex in itself, but then you figure out, okay, but I'm building a supply chain in another state and how those two interact and what I need to do from there. It just gets more and more complex. So we knew it's companies that operate in more than one jurisdiction. Again, so broad.
Yes.
There are so many companies that do that. And we kind of hazarded a guess where we came from the carbon market space. We knew that very, very well. It matched with our backgrounds and our knowledge. So we thought we'd build a product for experts, sustainability experts within carbon markets.
What is the carbon market? Just quickly.
So voluntary carbon market. So like things like offsets. So offsetting plane emissions, for instance. So we thought we'd build within that very, very narrow niche.
Okay.
And what we found was customers need speed to insights. They need coverage, so being able to provide coverage across all the jurisdictions. And they need the depth of insights. And we were thinking we'd build in these verticals to be able to provide that depth, and we can then expand. Once we cracked one, we'd go to the next, and so on and so forth. But as we developed the product and spoke to more and more people, what we actually found was that there are lots of non-experts that need a product like this. And obviously, it's a much easier product to build because we didn't need to go into quite the same level of depth of insights. But importantly, as CTOs, we now need to take a step back and understand, well, what's the price and revenue impact of that? And building for experts is always going to be quite a niche market, but often you can charge a higher price as a result. However, in our case, what we found was that the pricing was going to be very similar, but we were going to be charging to a much bigger market. And so, yes, it's an easier product to build, and the market's bigger, so it kind of is a no-brainer for us in that respect.
Why in that situation is the typical price differential that niche tends to be more expensive, and in this situation, not going niche, how could you prove that the value was still that high when it was not niche?
So typical products, if you're building for experts, because they need much more depth and analysis, you can charge higher. But for our case, because those experts didn't necessarily, they weren't necessarily like revenue generators in businesses, they couldn't pay a higher price. So it wasn't necessarily that we're moving to a different market and we're able to still charge a high price. It was just, this is the price. And if we move to a market where there's more people, this makes way more sense for us.
That makes sense. So how do you, because you also have this other issue that despite it being an incredibly time-sensitive crisis, nobody seems to care about the environment anymore. Sorry. We've got more pressing world issues, sadly, right now, though they all intertwine. So how do you make sure in your effort to broaden your potential customer base, you don't go too wide? How do you decide, actually, let's ask the audience again, who knows their ICP, their ideal customer profile, and it can be internal or external? See, this is actually troubling since the CTO is part of the business C-suite. That's those that do, good for you. The rest of you, ask, find out, because the whole reason you can save your budget and save the employees in your track is if you know the answers to these questions and can measure the engineering impact as tied to business. So yeah, with this in mind, how did you figure out that ICP, the ideal customer profile, and to not make it too broad? So, because you're like a micro company right now, so you have to be able to reach out to all those leads, and how do you do it all?
Yeah, so it's also a combination of what can we build now. I'd love to be able to provide insights across all policies ever, but realistically, like, we do need to focus somewhere to deliver a small chunk of value to prove that we can do that and then build from there. So for us, it's like, what's that small chunk of value, and where do we already have connections, where do we already have the potential customer base that we can then leverage to start proving that value. But then when I think about the technology that we're building, I know that this is potentially a direction that we're going in where we need to be able to cover all policies ever. So how do I make sure that things that are specific to sustainability policies are like modular and we can replicate in other types of policy as well?
That's true. Okay. So as you identified the ICP, let's talk about those conversations, because as CTOs, I truly believe you should be, no, I don't care what level of the company, talking to customers every day. Even the CTOs of FANG companies are talking to their biggest customers every day. It's that important. So I do believe that. So explain how that conversation works. How do you start that conversation with?
Yeah, I mean, I'd go one step further. I think engineers and everyone in your team should actually be speaking to customers.
That's true.
And typically we have, like in our kind of software cycle process, we have discovery conversations where we speak to customers, we understand what their problems are. We don't try and fit a solution at that stage. It's much more like, tell me about your general workflow, like walk me through a typical way that you'd approach this sort of project and that sort of thing. So we have the discovery conversation. We'd have either a technology person in that room or someone in the company that is a very good vibe coder, and everyone in the company now codes. And the reason for that is then they're able to understand challenges that customers are going through and then build a prototype from there. Often if you ask a customer, like, what do you want? They might tell you something, but it's not quite what they want.
Yeah, I heard it recently, Crane Capital called it the hair on fire problem. Yeah. It's not what you want, it's what is causing you the most urgent pain.
Yeah, exactly. So like asking questions to figure out what that pain really, really is and getting to that. Building a prototype that you can put into their hands and they can get a much better feel of what's the sort of thing that we're thinking and what the direction we're going in is. Getting immediate feedback on that and then building it with the smallest incremental chunks of value to get feedback as we're delivering that so we can change the course. And by doing it in that way with our customers in the loop so closely, we're then building much more trust into the product because they're brought along on their journey. They understand the feedback and they understand how the product is being developed as well. And so it demystifies some of like this AI black box part as well because they understand how we're iterating and how we're going through different things.
And then on the other hand, because AI is pretty exceptional at prototyping and whipping up things fast, so how are you using AI in building a product that does rely on also founder-led sales, so the trust you build with your customers, but also how are you using AI in the building?
Like fully natively. Yeah, I mean, as I said, everyone in the company is good at vibe coding now. So everyone uses either like Claude or Cursor, whatever their favorite tool is. I have an uncapped spend limit on AI tooling because I can see the value in it, particularly like with prototyping. It's just so fast to be able to show what people are thinking. And like, even if we know what we need to build in the product, often like translating between product and tech, like there's just this jumble in the middle. So by product, like building something that they think is what we need to develop within engineering, it really helps the communication between the two teams as well.
How does it work? So I guess a lot of what you're doing, AI is very good at explaining things and understanding complex data, especially when you talk about different jurisdictions. It can be different languages. It's very good at translation, things like that. But how often, so you're taking a lot of almost open source or external data and putting in, when you're building these prototypes, how, especially tying it back to the trust stack, how are you building it with your customer on their data? How are you bringing in like that extra piece? In this situation, does the customer's data affect the use of the product as well?
Yeah, so we take company data and policy data, and that's how we recommend what policies are relevant to people. And what's important there, like how we manage that situations with customers is super important because inherently humans at the moment have a massive distrust of AI. And so bringing them into those conversations, helping them understand how we will use their data is the most important thing. So right now, we don't train models on customer data. We train models on usage data, but that's slightly different where we're not taking any of the customer information and putting it into like training models. So in terms of building that trust as well within the product, it's super important to kind of have that transparency in your UI on how data is used. So thinking on things like our relevance algorithm, for instance, like helping users understand what is being brought into that as inputs to help them understand like why they can trust the outputs as well. And also flagging like what is next within the UI as well. So being able to say, right now, we recommend policies to you based on X, Y, and Z. And by the way, A, B, and C will be used next.
So you're an engineer, which of course, excuse me, has both positive and negatives, where engineers famously think they know what they're building is right. Has there been a point when you've realized you were heading in the wrong direction, or because you also you have domain experience in this field a lot. So has there been any point where you're like, okay, I need to stop this direction? How do you know that? How do you measure your progress and understand whether you need to move? Sorry.
I wouldn't necessarily say we've had completely the wrong direction yet. We've definitely experienced things where we're spending too long on a problem and we need to kind of park it and move on, which is so difficult for engineering teams to do. So,
what is too long in the face of a startup?
Over a month.
Okay.
And like there was this one challenge that we had where extracting a date from policy documents on when they become effective is a surprisingly hard challenge. You can pick up dates easily from policies, but you can't necessarily say when this policy comes into effect just from the document. It's very difficult. And we're spending a long time like trying to crack that problem and still like having really poor accuracy. And why we parked that wasn't because it didn't show value to users. It's because we couldn't crack it within the time frame that we needed to like progress and move on to other aspects, and we couldn't get the accuracy within that time frame to make sure that that feature wouldn't diminish trust in other features within the product.
Could you use a human in the loop in that situation?
We have almost a million documents, so
Yeah.
no.
It does say something, yeah. Even for like certain EU policies right now, we're like, okay, have a friend come to visit the EU in the summer from the US. Does she need the new ESTER, whatever it's called there? It's not clear when things are going into effect, so I can understand that lack of uncertainty. So in that face of that, how do you tackle a problem that with AI, or maybe not humans, but I don't know, Excel spreadsheets back to, sorry. How do you face tackling a problem that even AI can't tackle, but it is important, I assume, to your project?
I don't think it's necessarily that AI can't tackle that problem. I think it can. It just takes longer than the time that we have. And when you take into account like how long features take to build, and like the rest of your roadmap and the rest of the value that you need to create, then that one just became like too long for the value that it derives.
Trade-offs.
Yeah.
That's a huge part. That's the part of the business aspect of the CTO role. The CTOs have to talk to businesses, to the business side as well. How does that work when you're, again, I say this not derogatory, but a baby startup, because you are, and that's okay. That's how they all started. They all grew up in baby startups. How do you connect everything to business when there's so much urgency on the tech?
As in, how do we connect what we're doing on the tech side to like
revenue
business?
And setting prices? Like, don't give us the secrets, but I think you are in a unique position that your tech role is so tied to business and the survival of your company. That how do you make those trade-offs and figure out things like revenue? Are you using AI to help you do your math, or how do you do all that?
I mean, we have meetings once a week with the whole company where we go through the latest customer feedback and really understand what are the pain points of customers now and what are some short-term things we can tackle to address that, whilst keeping in mind what is the overall direction based on all of the past feedback we've had from customers. This is quite a difficult challenge still, but I mean, we use different tools within that, like Fathom and all these note takers, where it's really easy to kind of send clips of customers talking to Slack so that the engineers can watch that and get the feedback firsthand as well. But I mean, prioritization remains a difficult task for any tech leader, and I think it always will be.
And when you say customers, is that just like your ICP, is that leads as well? It's everyone you're working with is treated like a customer at this stage?
Everyone and anyone we're working with. So like, we have our existing customers, we have a load of different prospects in the pipeline, and we need to be able to cater for both.
Which is technically how it should work with AI, even within your product. Because when you're just ramming AI into a product, you could lose current customers, you could retain them more, you could break that trust. There's so much going on with that. So we have questions from the audience. Do you use LLMs or a specific machine learning model?
Combination.
Yes, I assumed yes was the answer.
We use ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude all within the product, as well as our own models, as well as other open source models. So it's a real variety, and it really just depends on what the use case is and what the best tooling is for that.
How do you go about deciding which models to use, especially because you have quite a narrow use case right now? And will that change if you bring in other policies? I guess, will that involve different models, or?
Yeah, so it also depends, like, what's the core value to our product. So the model that determines whether a policy matches a company is very core value, and models out there like aren't very good at it because it's so specific to us. So that sort of thing we're building in-house, and I think it's important to keep like the core value in-house.
Which is that core value? Can we-
So for us, that's answering the question, what policies are relevant to me as a user?
Okay.
And then other models, it just depends on how they've progressed,
Yeah.
what they're good for, what we have free credits for.
I think those are really excellent questions as you're considering LLMs. It's different to do it in a little baby pilot stage within your company, but once you're scaling, you have to make sure it fits with everyone. And then maybe just one last question. Weekly iteration and user trust seem like they could be in tension, less stability. What's the line between we're improving this and we can't make up our minds? How do you be decisive as the startup founder in this age?
I would say that sounds like it's don't be too responsive to customer feedback. That second part of the question, really, where like you need to make sure you're building towards something, but also responding to user needs at the moment. And I think there's a real, like one of the hidden metrics of trust is product velocity. And if you're finding that you're having to respond to user feedback because they didn't quite understand a feature, or they're not using it in the ways that's anticipated, often that's a trust bug rather than a product bug. And so if you're finding those situations, perhaps there's like more underlying things you need to do to address the trust in your product rather than being able to focus on the overall long-term roadmap.
Thank you so much, Georgie, and good luck in your journey. We wish you luck.
Thank you so much.